Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. For those of you new to my channel, I review all things movie and TV. So if you like what you hear, subscribe, share, and comment down below. And the end of an era, you know, the alliance with the kids, it's over, it's done, it's dusted. Can Pinky dance? Yes, she can. And they had spent so much time bonding and coming together, and now it's all over, right? And there are many reasons for that. And every time I look at Lucas, I see him as like the smarter Kendall. I don't know, watching him this episode was really interesting because it's hard to read him. I don't know if he's worse than Logan. You know, like he comes off so, he's tall, he looks like a Bond villain, and he seems to have a habit of buying companies and then like dismantling these companies. So he's not a builder, right? He's not someone who wants to build and leave a legacy. He wants to destroy other people's legacies. And so why he wants ATN, what he wants to do with Waystar, we're not really sure, but he wants it, and he wants it quite badly. And also, he's a businessman, right? Like, he was angry, he was emotional, but he kind of set up a situation in which he won regardless, right? He kind of created an environment where it was really impossible for Ken and Roman to kind of change the narrative or control the narrative. And these episodes take place day by day, so it doesn't help that they're going to Norway while they should be grieving their father. So the whole time they're negotiating with, you know, Lucas, they're also getting news from Connor about what's going on in New York, about Marsha. You know, he's asking if he can network at this funeral. Like, they literally missed their father's funeral, it seems. And this is adding extra stress. And I don't think Roman would have blown up if Connor hadn't sent that picture, right? So I think Connor sent a picture of their father. He saw the picture, and I think that's what caused them to lose it. And we also know that he's been taking pills or some type of antidepressant, because when he's in his room alone unpacking, you see that he takes out like this pill bottle. And so I think he was already exhausted, and then that was the moment that triggered him. And I also think they would have been open to selling ATN had their father not died like 2 days before, right? Like there was just too much emotional attachment to it. And I think more than that, I think Shiv would have been open to keeping ATN had they looped her in and kind of explained to her, like, listen, what if we just run the ship, right? Like, what if we just do it? But they never loop Shiv in. And again, the environment is not one in which they can win. And I think watching Ken, Shiv, and Roman, like, none of them like Lucas. You know, and I also don't think they were in the right state of mind to be here. The only difference is Shiv was able to bite her tongue long enough to gain his trust. Whereas Roman and Kendall, I think they had a plan. I think they really had a strategy in dealing with Lucas, but they could not hide their poker face, right? It was a disaster. They were being triggered by everything he said. They were visibly bothered. They were exhausted. And I think they surprised themselves with how poorly they conducted themselves. So the episode starts with Ken listening to Jay-Z. You know, he's the new king of New York, right? He comes in, his back is straight, he's wearing a suit. He looks like a businessman. And I think there's nothing holding him down, right? And you get this sense throughout this whole episode, like everybody's just free falling. Nobody knows what to do. Everything's just up in the air. And so Kendall's plan at first seems sound. I'm going to go to Norway and I'm going to finish this deal. But his plans get turned upside down when Lucas says, sure, come to Norway, but you got to bring your team. And instinctively, Kendall knows that that's messed up, right? He's like, what happens if we say no to this? You know, but unfortunately, he doesn't really have the leverage or the influence to say no without extreme pushback from everybody, right? So you see the old guard, you see literally everybody in the office. Nobody knows what to do. They can't go into Logan's office because he just died. They're still trying to figure out what to do with that. And they're all just sitting there, right? Like human listening devices. Everybody wants to know what's going to happen so they can figure out how to cover themselves. And so this opportunity to go to Norway is an opportunity for everyone. And I don't think Logan in a million years would have agreed to this compatibility check. Like, he would never have pandered. And I wonder, like, Logan kind of had plans, it seems, to fire people. And I'm not sure why. But again, like, he just would not have given Lucas that power, because the minute they go to Norway, everyone is more concerned with what Lucas and his team thinks than what Kendall and the children think. Like, the power dynamics kind of shift. And so that was That was a big thing. So you start to see cracks in the alliance quite early on, right? And at first I was with Roman. I supported Roman, you know, when he was like, let's loop Shiv in. But it just became disingenuous and weird, right? Like, if you want to loop her in, loop her in. Like, you have to loop her in. Like, it just became like just talking points, right? And he never really does it. And so as the episode goes on, you're like, ugh. On the plane to Norway, everybody is kind of scared, right? They're scared of this kill list. They know about Lucas's reputation to basically fire everybody from the companies that he buys. And watching Shiv was really interesting because she tries her best to get back in their good graces, right? But she keeps getting swerved, right? So the first thing has to do with all this negative press about her father. And she kind of says, listen, if you want to slander dad to make yourselves bigger, that's fine. Just let me know. Like, give me a chance to like help you guys out. But they continually give her the cold shoulder. And I'm not sure about Ken and Roman. Like, I don't think Roman knows that Ken is the one orchestrating these stories, because his reaction to Higo was a bit like, that was weird. But whatever the case, these two seem to have established like this bond. And that bond largely has to do with shutting Shiv out. So Shiv is walking around. She's like, I'll go talk to Jerry. She gives Tom the cold shoulder. You know, like, she's really trying to keep herself busy. Get to Norway, it's beautiful. Like, I'm glad that they changed the scenery. You know, like, New York is a bit cold. And I like how every time they go to these new places, these children are miserable, right? Like, it always ends explosively. They're in these wonderful settings and they're just like sad and angry. And I like the way they set up this episode, because it's like they're on top of this beautiful area, like this mountainous like forest. I don't know, it's really nice. And then Lucas is staying somewhere above them, right? So Lucas is looking at all of them like ants. And I don't know how Lucas sees himself. Like, he sees himself as a Bond villain. He sees himself as something, but Kendall wasn't having it. He's like, why did you invite us to this bridal salon? Like, what are you trying to do? Like, this could have been an email. This could have been a phone call. And so the way he kind of puts them in these rooms, you know, creates this schedule that everybody has to follow and go along with in order for his team to figure out, you know, two things: who to fire and who they can kind of keep and replace their own people with. Like, there was kind of two things going on at the same time. Was really well done. And the other thing I really appreciated before we get to these negotiations is that everybody thinks it's going well, right? Like, nobody actually sees what Ken and Roman are saying to Lucas, right? Like, because Lucas is coming out with these numbers, and as far as everyone is concerned, like, he's interested, and that's fine. And I love that contrast, because from the outside looking in, you're like, oh, this is going well. But when you look inside, you're like, oh my God, that's a disaster. Like, things are not going well. First time they meet Lucas, it's super awkward, right? They're forced to take this cart all the way up to go see him. They don't really have a plan. They're getting calls from Connor. Frank and Carl are like, what are you going to do? What's the plan? You know, like, start off with a joke. That's what your father would have done. Like, they don't know what they're doing. Surprisingly, Lucas shows up alone. And this moment is the moment where they started to really lose Shiv. Because it's one thing to lock out the old guard, but it's another thing to leave Shiv out, right? Like, that was awkward. That was a golden opportunity for Roman to be like, hey, not without Shiv. So the negotiating team, I think Lucas assumed the siblings were close. And I think that first meeting kind of alerted him to the fact that they weren't. And he's starting to see cracks in the armor, right? And he starts to use that to his advantage. So this first meeting is awkward. And normally Roman is sarcastic and really annoying. But in this case, he was really angry. Like, there was an undercurrent of anger, right? You know, it's not like our father died 2 or 3 days ago. And even Kendall was testy, right? Normally he's pretty calm, but you know, talking to Lucas, he was quite triggered, right? I'd rather you not cut me off. Like, I think they were just so, like, annoyed that they were there. And when they kind of hear the news that he wants to buy the whole company, you know, the entirety of the, like, take the whole thing, take the whole kitchen, you know, that was kind of a breaking point. And watching Roman and Ken is interesting because Ken tries his best to be a businessman. Like, he tries to be like, you know what, what's the number? And the thing is, this is not an inheritance, right? So the fact that Roman was so triggered, you know, like, why do you want it? You know, what does that have to do with any of this? Like, he's so emotional, but again, this is not an inheritance, right? Like, he's offering to buy something he can do whatever he wants with it. He doesn't have to agree with your vision. You know, I think he says it best. It's like, he's like, I felt like I was at the checkout and I was asked to pay more. So if I'm going to pay more, like, I'll give you as much money as you want, but I'm going to take everything, right? Like, because that's what this is about, right? Is this about money? Like, what is this really about? And that's really the problem here, because they make it about themselves, not about the deal, which is why Ken, Roman, and Shiv, honestly, like, they're just really bad business people, right? And it showed in this first meeting. I think Lucas sees the kids as just relatives of this rich guy that's standing in his way, right? He's really condescending. He's like, well, you're supposed to give me an answer next, right? Like, I don't know if you've done this before. Like, he was really condescending. Basically, like, listen, I don't really need to talk to you, but we can do this the easy way or the hard way. And so when they kind of present this offer, everybody's just super happy that Lucas is still interested. Like, they're so relieved, right? They don't really care about ATN. They don't really care about this emotional BS, right? They're like, just take the money and get out. Like, that's all we need. And when they present this offer to Shiv, she's like, what are we doing? Right? ATN is a toxic asset and we need to get it out. And Shiv is really, she's tried her best to kind of go along with the boys, but she's actually not one of the boys. Right, so she kind of comes to discover that ATN is being used to actively promote this presidential candidate that she considers to be a racist and someone that she doesn't really like. And without Logan there, it just feels like everyone is taking advantage of them, right? I think Shiv says it best, like, even dad had limits. And by limits, we mean he wouldn't allow, like, this is getting out of hand, right? Like, Roman is kind of using ATN, you know, to do people personal favors. And again, that's the problem with these children. They're not able to separate the personal from the business, especially during this time, during this critical time. And so Shiv is on board. And again, this was a moment where they could have convinced her otherwise. Instead, they give her this weird excuse, right? We can't go through dad maps. And that's the contradiction. It's like, you want to do what dad would have done, but then at the same time, you don't know what dad would do. You know, it's like, you can't have it both ways. It's like, you need to take some accountability. Outside of this kind of little technicality, you know, everybody seems to think everybody's, you know, everything's going fine. And watching them at this party, it's, you know, they can't hide their disdain, right? Like, slowly things start to seep out, right? Like, everybody is just kind of looking at each other sideways. For some reason, Greg seems to know everything about everyone. Like, I don't know how he knew about the kill list. I don't know how he knows about Lucas's sex life. Like, that was really awkward and really strange, right? Like, that was just weird. And I think the minute ATN becomes up for grabs, like, the whole vibe changes, right? And you can see that with Tom's behavior. Like, Tom kind of goes into this more worried about the kids than he is about losing his job. And there's a scene where he awkwardly interrupts Lucas to take a seat, and they're discussing politics, and they're discussing basically France and whether or not France will become the new Greece, and they're asking Tom's opinion about it. And Tom is like, straight up, we don't really care about that. You know, we don't care about what you Europeans think. We have a Paris. If it burns down, we'll build it up again. You know, he was just straight up. He wasn't pandering. He wasn't trying to serve. He wasn't pretending to do anything, right? And that kind of shocked me. I don't know about you guys. I was just kind of taken aback. And even Lucas was like, oh, okay. And again, Lucas is not a builder, right? He's kind of a destroyer. And this is the moment where I knew that this deal would fall apart, or that Roman and Kendall were becoming unhinged, because they started to defend Greg. Right, Greg's raggedy behind, who wasn't supposed to be at this party, by the way. He wasn't supposed to be there. Nobody invited him. He was just there, which was really interesting. So they didn't really, I don't know who brought him or why. And he starts talking about this article he read in The Economist. And then Lucas was like, wait a minute, who are you? And what are you doing at my party? And Ken is like, that's our cousin. He's good, man. And that's how I know that they don't like this man. And there was a moment where they started speaking Swedish. I don't know what they said. If y'all speak Swede, you let me know. But it just looked condescending. And there was a guy in the background just laughing his ass off, you know, trying to kick it. But you could tell he didn't even know what they were saying. Like, that was so funny and so awkward. But the tensions were high. So this is the second meeting unofficial between Ken, Roman, and Lucas. And this is the part where he can kind of understand that they're unhinged, right? He basically offers to buy ATN again. And the mistake that they make is that Shiv overhears everything, right? Shiv and Tom overhear the whole conversation. And Shiv loved everything that Lucas was saying. Now, whether or not Lucas was pandering to her as the only female in the room, I'm not sure. You guys let me, it felt like he was pandering, right? He was saying a lot of really good things. Like everything he was saying sounded good, but I'm not really sure that they were. The idea that Lucas doesn't know what he's buying. He knows what he's buying. He just doesn't, again, it's not an inheritance. He can buy it and he can do whatever he wants with it. He says something quite cruel, right? He's like, you guys are a tribute band. You're basically here to echo Logan's wishes. So you need to go ahead and echo and be on your way. And that was the moment the deal blew up, right? And I'm not sure if Lucas kind of was antagonizing them to trigger the people around them, right? Because they were listening, and you know, things were kind of split. And so this moment is the turning point. Like this is the part where had they looped Shiv in, I think everything would have been okay. So Ken and Roman decide on their own that they're gonna blow up the deal, right? They're gonna blow up the deal. They're gonna choose their own adventure. And they're going to start bossing, right? They're captains of the ship, and they want to continue being captain. And this is not about money, right? They like the power. They like the validation. I think they like the fact that people are actually listening to their opinions, that people are actually doing what they say. Like, it's not fake busy work that their father made them do. Like, this is real work. And I don't think they want to give up that power that they just got. And for that, it's hubris, right? Like, you're flying way too close to the sun. And they should have, you know, had they tried to talk to Shiv, I think that would have been a game changer, right? Like they're at a disadvantage. They need to convince everybody that this is Lucas's idea. They tried their best and things didn't work out. And the reason they failed is because they didn't really have a plan, right? They don't have tight control over their ship. And you see that with this conversation with Lucas and Shiv. And watching Shiv with Lucas was interesting because although she acts like one of the boys, she's not one of the boys, right? He offers her cocaine. He offers her a drink. She looks visibly uncomfortable, like, ugh, this raggedy man. And again, she doesn't like anything that Lucas is saying, right? He says things like, you should have been here last week. And she's like, yep, last week when our father was still alive. And he kind of gives this really grim story. Like he basically says, I have no boundaries. And basically he's telling her like, I know no limits, right? When someone tells you they don't have boundaries, they're saying they don't have limits and they're willing to do anything to win. And this whole story about blood, sending blood to his comms director, I think he was being sarcastic. Like maybe I took it the wrong way, but I don't think he did that, right? I think what he's saying is that he's put in so much money into this deal that he's like bleeding out. Like first he wasn't that serious about the deal, then he was, and now he's dead serious, right? He's willing to give his like every last drop, but he needs to know that it's a guarantee. And that's why he calls Shiv in, right? He's like, how do I guarantee that this goes through to the board and nothing happens? Like how can I get ahead of this, right? So he's basically decided in that moment in talking to Shiv that he's going to go around her brothers, right? And she understands that, I think. She's like, listen, first you need to stop sending blood. You know, we can help you. Our comms director is really good. Jerry is really good. I was surprised that Shiv went to bat for Jerry. That was really surprising. She keeps her off that kill list because she 100% would have been on that kill list. So why she did that, what her motives are, knowing that she doesn't like Jerry, I'm not really sure. But for the time being, she's in his good graces, right? And a door opened up and Shiv's whole vibe changes, right? There's a cute scene after that meeting where she starts to flirt with Tom. Like, were they flirting? What was that? You know, like when she starts kicking his shoes and he kind of snaps at her. Like, I think they were flirting. I think she was kind of like, I think she was turned on by the fact that she sees some use, like she's able to kind of use him again. I don't know, but like they were definitely flirting. She has a skip in her step. She was looking at everybody like, finally, I have leverage. And she tells her brothers, you know, she's like, listen, he will go high. You know, like he's willing to bleed out for this. So we get to this final scene, and I honestly think Roman would have kept it chill if he had not seen that picture. Right? The picture that Connor sent, I think, just sent him spiraling. And so when they get to meet Lucas, they're already annoyed. You know, they want to blow up the deal, right? They start talking about cultural compatibilities, saying how this movie is a bomb. Like, they basically forced everybody to watch this shitty movie in hopes of convincing everyone that Waystar is a disaster, that ATN doesn't know what it's doing. Like, they're trying to, like, plant these seeds, but unfortunately they don't have enough time to plant these seeds. And I think before Lucas got up there, he had already decided that, like, the plan had been in motion. It felt like he met them just to trigger them and piss them off. Like, he was just there to play games with them. Like, his life was not on the line. And you could see that by the way he was like, listen, are you guys kidding me? And the things that came out of Lucas's mouth, right? Your dad was a prick. If he saw you right now, he would be embarrassed. What kind of business school did you go to? Like, he was going in on them. And he was going in on them way too comfortably for someone that doesn't know he has a deal, right? And the scene where Roman goes off, right? So he's taking a piss, and Roman literally, like, infiltrates his personal space. You know, Lucas doesn't stop. He just kind of looks at him because he's taking a piss on them, basically, like, but they don't know it yet. And Roman goes off, right? He goes off, and I understood on one part why he was frustrated. You know, he was dead inside. He's tired. He doesn't want to be here. The whole bit about blaming Lucas for bleeding his father dry, that was kind of BS, right? Like, the reason their father was on a plane is because they refused to settle for that money. Like, they refused to settle. And now they're in a position where they flew too close to the sun, and he's about to take everything from them, and they deserve it fully, right? So Roman was emotional. He couldn't control himself. You know, he calls him everything under the sun. And watching Kendall just, like, in his sunglasses, horrified, right? Like, he's trying to keep control, but he can see that things are spiraling out of control. And there's a moment where he kind of pauses and looks at Lucas, and you can tell he understood in that moment, like, they were effed. Like, he could tell that they'd kind of been played. Like, that was the vibe I got at the end of that scene, right? Like literally, Ken is just paralyzed. He's looking at him like, maybe that worked, but it probably didn't work. So they get back on the plane, and Frank gets the call, right? So I'm pretty sure Shiv coached Lucas on who to call to get past these kids. And Frank was the perfect person to call. And when they hear this number, they start congratulating each other. They think these kids are geniuses. They think they really pulled one off, right? Like, again, had they seen the real behind the scenes, they would not be patting them on the back. And Shiv is in the background patting herself on the back, like, I did such a great job, right? And she's turned on by this power, right? And that scene when she, like, takes a picture for Lucas, right? When she's like, send me a picture of their faces. I was like, and I think Lucas is using her. You know, I think for the time being, he's her eyes and ears. And when he no longer needs her, he's going to get rid of her, right? Like, a guy like Lucas just seems like he gets off on cutting people down. But for the time being, Shiv has some plans, right? She orders Tom to fire, they're going to start purging ATN. She's going to basically get back into politics. Like, I think Shiv has an idea of Lucas as maybe more liberal or more open-minded than maybe he really is, right? Like, that's what I'm wondering. Is he, that's what I'm wondering, right? So whatever, Tom is back in her good graces. Watching their reaction to this kill list was hilarious, right? Like, Jerry was like, oh my God, me? I'm safe? And Carl was so angry, right? Like, not Tom. Like, how is Tom's raggedy behind safe? So that was really funny. Like, that kill list came through, and they're done. Guys, let me know what you think, and until next time.